Very good morning to all our dear listeners. It's an afternoon to some people, depending where you are, it's an evening. But you are most welcome to yet another edition of ACFIM Talks. Your host, as usual, is Felix Kafuma, and today we are discussing a very interesting topic, and that is understanding and interrogating the proposed financial year budget, which was presented last week. Um, uh, we want to look at the hits and the misses, and we're looking at the financial year 2022 and 2023. So, with me in the studios, I have um, Michelle Aineviona. I hope I pronounced that name right.
It's Mitchell.
C. Mitchell.
Mitchell.
Yeah,
Yep.
Mitchell. Michelle is for the other gender.
Or
My
if you're
apologies.
French.
It's French, probably. Yeah, I have Micho Aineriona and Molondo Moses. I'll be introducing them in a short while. But before I introduce them, let me take this time, a minute or two, briefly to invite everybody who is just joining in. We sorry we are late. We started a bit slightly late. We had some technical issues. But for those who always wait for this show, please join the discussions, be part of it on our Facebook page, ACFIM, on our YouTube account, ACFIM Uganda, and Twitter handle at ACFIM UG, and be able to participate, send your questions, send your comments, and so it's good to have you and interact with us. But sending your questions, and as we start, let me now, with honor, introduce. You will forgive me. We only have it's a man's show, no ladies, no pun intended. That's how it happened. All the ladies were committed, and that's understandable. But let's represent you very well in this show. I have with me. Let me start with Moses Mulondo, who is the president for Uganda Parliamentary Press Association (UPPA). He's a journalist and really qualified journalist with a Masters of Business in Administration from Makerere University, but also a degree in Mass Communication. He's one of the leading staff writers for New Vision, one of the leading papers in Uganda, and he writes on the national budget and coordinates the Greater World Development Forum. You are most welcome, Moses Mulondo.
Thank you, Felix.
All right. I also have Aineviona, who is an economist, as currently working with Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, and that's the group that looks into how our budget processes, how transparent they are, how participatory they are, whether they do represent the priorities of the wananchi, and they track the process and the utilization. He's currently the budget policy specialist with the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group, but has a lot of experience in research and public policy development. You are most welcome, Aineviona Mitchell.
Thank you very much, and good morning, viewers.
All right. Since we lost time, allow me to dive deep into the discussions, and I'm going to start with Moses. We all know that the approved budget for financial year 2022-2023 is standing at 43 trillion, about 2 trillion less than the current budget that is coming to an end in a couple of months, which stood at 44.7. Yes. Let me first pick your brains and your expertise. First of all, those are figures, but break it down for a wananchi. What are the wins? What are the losses for a barefoot man or woman, for someone in the market?
Okay, first of all, our viewers have to understand that the budgeting process has just started for the next financial year, 2022-2023. It started with government presenting the budget framework paper towards the end of December 2021, as the Public Finance Management Act requires. So what has been released in the budget framework paper, it's the draft budget for the next financial year, but the discussions are still on. It has been put at 43 trillion. But from the previous experience, usually at the end of the budgeting process, which will end in May, when Parliament is required to finally approve the final budget, the figures keep changing. So, but yes, it has been put at 43 trillion, but slightly lower than the budget for the current financial year of 2021-2022, which is 44.7 trillion. But I also have to inform the viewers that because of the supplementary budgets for the current financial year, in November 2021, last year, Parliament approved a supplementary budget of 3.8 trillion. And last week, another supplementary budget of 4.7 trillion was presented. Now, this means at the end of the current financial year, the total budget will have risen from the initial 44.7 trillion to over 53 trillion. But the major concern from a number of several stakeholders is that whereas the expenditures are escalating, the revenue collections are not increasing, because even in the course of this week, URA released revenue collection figures, and they indicated that for the first half of the current financial year, they have registered a shortfall of close to $1 trillion, about 900 billions. So certainly that means that the additional resources that have caused the budget to rise to 53 trillion will certainly have to come from borrowing. And the revenue collection target for the current financial year is about 22 trillion, but debt repayment, the portion of the national budget that is going to debt repayment is about 15 trillion. The wage bill is 5.5 trillion. Now that means that all the money that government collects here, revenue collection, if you put off the money that government spends on debt repayment, about 15 trillion, and the wage bill for paying government workers, which has reached 5.5 trillion, it means government will be left with nothing, with actually even a deficit. Now, it means to implement all the government programs, activities in all the different sectors, the money would have to come from borrowing. So that's a very big challenge that we have as a country, that our national budget actually is not realistic. I know as an economist will be confirming this, that government is spending beyond its means. The revenue collections are very meager, but the expenditures keep escalating. But for the budget for the next financial year, which was approved by Parliament last week, the major concern of the budget committee was that the portion of the national budget that goes to security keeps going up. You will all recall that in the last financial year, about 3.8 trillion of the budget for security was classified expenditure. So the bulk of our budget is actually going into recurring expenditures. We even borrow for recurrent expenditures. Even when you look at the budget for the local governments, which is about 4.7 trillion, studies indicate that more than 85% of it goes into recurrent expenditures. Actually, for wages alone for local governments, 65% of our budget for local governments goes to paying wages. And that is because government has created so many administrative units which have caused the cost of public administration to be so high. Our government has been the key flagship project for the next financial year, even for this current financial year, is the parish development model, which has been allocated 465 billions. But the government has been promising that each parish will be given a minimum of 100 million. So if you divide 465 billions, certainly that is not enough for each parish to get 100 million, because we have more than 10,000 parishes. It would require more than $1 trillion to be allocated to the parish development 1.1 trillion to be allocated to the parish development model for each parish at least to be able to get 100 millions, regardless of the size of the population, which is another debate, because that has been a concern for some legislators from the central region. They say their parishes are densely populated, so 100 million is just a drop in the ocean that cannot change anything. The other thing is government has put money about 450 billions in the budget for the next financial year to increase salaries mainly for the scientists, medical workers, science teachers, but they have not put in money to increase salaries for other categories of government workers. And that is a major concern for so many other people, because so many civil servants are extremely paid poorly and they handle billions of money. Many people think that is why corruption continues to be so high, because these people are handling billions of money and they are paid peanuts. There has been a major concern in Parliament that government has cut the budget for the health sector by 111 billions, and at a time when we are still struggling with COVID. And the budget, the Parliament decision was that this money should be reinstated. The 43 trillion budget government, the revenue projections are that 25.5 trillion will be coming from revenue collections. Of course, these projections were made before the economy was fully reopened. I am sure, in as much as government has been struggling to meet the revenue collection targets in the next financial year, there is a high likelihood that they will be able to achieve the targets because the economy has been fully reopened. I looked at the minority report from the opposition on this lofty budget, and their major concern was capital flight. Their argument is that all the trillions of money government is allocating to the works and transport and other infrastructure projects, it goes to foreign companies which actually repatriate the money, and that is very true. I don't know what government will do to change that, but it's a very major concern that a huge portion of our national budget that goes to infrastructure projects, it actually goes to foreign companies which repatriate the funds. The local companies, especially the construction companies, have not yet, government has not helped them to build the capacity to be able to take on these big projects. So because of what I told you concerning the debt repayment, increasingly every financial year, the portion of the national budget that goes to debt repayment actually goes up. In the current financial year, it is 15 trillion. In the budget for the next financial year, it is 16 trillion. So right now, close to 40% of our national budget actually goes to debt repayment. And our public debt has now risen to about 73 trillion. But the major concern from many from many experts is that whereas people in government keep arguing that our debt is sustainable, but many of us argue it is not sustainable, because not only is debt repayment now taking the biggest portion of the national budget, but also our tax to GDP ratio is actually one of the lowest in the world at only 13%. When a country has a low tax to GDP ratio, it means, and the INEVIONA will be confirming this, it means that it has limited capacity to raise enough resources to pay back the debts, to pay back the loans. So, and I think that is why government is now scaling down on the rate of borrowing, and they have now resorted to rationalization of government, merging different government entities and reducing on wasteful expenditures. Only that my major concern is that they are over dragging their feet on this issue. The plan has been there for the last 6 years, but they are over dragging their feet in merging because, of course, we have so many government entities that are doing the same work, and that is a step in the right direction, merging them and minimizing on wasteful expenditures. But of course, in the draft budget, in the budget framework paper for the next financial year, they have indicated that they have saved about 1.2 trillion from cutting from a number of wasteful expenditures and reallocated the money. But of course, more money can be saved by reallocating and cutting from wasteful expenditures and merging government entities. It's just that government has been very slow in moving in that direction.
I seem to be losing a little bit, Moses. But I'm going to come back on that issue of rationalization. Let me first bring in Ainebiona in here. Can you hear me, Ainebiona?
Loud and clear.
Okay, all right. Moses, I'm going to come back to you on that one because you've really helped to carry down what the outlook of this proposed budget. And coming to you, I know for a fact that CS Bag is in the thick and thin of this process. You have participated and you are still participating. But from where you stand, from your standpoint, what are your quick thoughts looking at this 43 trillion budget framework paper that is proposed by the executive that has been debated in Parliament? What are the quick wins? What are the quick losses we can make of this budget?
Thank you very much, Felix, and thank you very much, Moses. Moses has literally talked about everything. Just maybe farm up some of the things that he has shared. Felix and the viewers listening, it's important that we first understand the context. I love to usually paint a context before we delve into some of the deeper discussions, knowing that the viewership may not know some of the things that we're going to say, technical as they may. Felix, we've been in a pandemic, and the COVID has been very, very, very detrimental to our economy. A number of things that we had initially planned in our NDP3, of course, were affected. A lot of targets that we had set out were distorted. We saw an increase in poverty levels. I think the Uganda National Household Survey report of 2021 reveals that about 3.2 million extra people fell into poverty as a result of the COVID-19 impact on the economy. We've seen school dropouts, that's on the socio-economic. We've seen a low rollout of vaccines, despite there being an outcry at the peak that they wanted more vaccination. Government was not able to get the right doses. They came through, but people are still having a low uptake. Out-of-pocket expenditure as well increased. You know that. We have only about, I think, 3.9%. If you look at the Uganda National Household Survey, support the latest, about only 3.9% can access insurance. So most of the other population was accessing their health financing and support from their pockets, something that was quite costly. In terms of the economic outlook, we see a widened trade deficit as a result of the COVID-19. I remember in 2019, it was about 3,676 million USD. As a result of the COVID-19, when we pulled out towards the end, I think around last year, it was at around 5,000 million USD. That's a big trade deficit. We also saw a decline in remittances, people who send money from abroad to support their families within the diaspora, that also reduced by about 189 million in the previous financial year. So we also saw a reduction in foreign direct investments. All these are things that we have to put in context before we start blaming the ministry for some of their decisions that they have done. So it's good to understand where it is that they're coming from before we get into delving what it is they've now chosen. With that background, Felix, I would want the viewers to know, I know we can speak very technical things and sometimes we lose them. The National Budget Framework Paper, like Moses said, is part of the critical processes in the budget making process. It's the one that actually provides a macroeconomic picture of the budget for the next financial year. And this is very critical, of course. It plays a very critical role in achieving the country's vision and objectives, as laid down by the national development plans. So it lays a very good foundation for for any person to assess where this country is headed regarding finances, So as Moses mentioned, towards I think the end of last year, Parliament passed Ministry of Finance tabled this before Parliament while we're getting to the festivities. And as CSBAG, as usual, we sat down to try and internalize it and review it, especially at the citizens' perspective, not looking at the high level. And we're trying to break it down. What is in it for the citizen? What is it? What is there for them to celebrate about this new budget? Is it a budget like any other? Especially given the issues that we've gone through, the issues that I have painted. People have fallen into poverty, FDI inflows have reduced, a number of issues are at hand. Has this budget been created in a way that will help address some of those issues? Is what we sought to look through as we were reviewing this. And by law, of course, the Public Finance Management Act does provide for the Minister of Finance setting this and preparing it and sending it before Parliament. And looking at the theme to begin with, because the theme speaks a lot. It's when I'm analyzing the budget, I will look at the theme and make sure that all the things that you've put in the theme are reflected in the allocations done. If you look at the theme, it was actually changed, I think, towards the end of last year. The theme of the budget of next financial year is full monetization of the Ugandan economy. One, through commercial agriculture, take note of that, industrialization, market access, and digital transformation. Felix, in my opinion, those are very, very, very good, well thought out areas and thematic areas to look for, given the picture that I have painted of what is at hand. The bigger question now goes to how much of this has been actualized in the figures that we are going to discuss about in the next few minutes. So looking at this, Moses has already painted quite a number of this. We are seeing increasing expenditures. We're seeing increasing allocations to debt repayment, which has now gone up. And I think we're now going to allocate some money on the principal this time, on the principal payments of the debt that we have accrued over the years. Before, we had just been allocating money just to the interest on the debt that has also been growing exponential. I think it's now close to almost 6 trillion, But now, some of those things are coming to bite, which we will discuss hopefully later. We are seeing a reduction in revenue. By the way, we want to commend URA for, to be honest, I expected the target less given what was at hand. The economy was shut down. I mean, it was partially open, but they were still able to collect what they collected, and for that, I commend them. However, the target was set, and it's really, really, really low. If you look at the previous targets that they had set, they looked good on paper. I mean, in 2020, they had set about, I think, 21.6 trillion. They were able to collect about only 19 trillion. You've seen the shortfall that they have registered in the current financial year as of half year. So all these definitely are concerning, Felix. Why is the expenditure increasing? And like Moses highlighted, this is just a draft, the 43. By the end, by May, it will have gone, mark my words, it will have gone up maybe close to even 45, because there are quite a number of issues that are going to emerge and they will try and consider them, okay? So we're seeing that the revenues are not going up, despite the target still being up. I remember the PSST in his recent communication was saying the target actually should have been left the way it was, than putting it up, Putting it up means what from the trend that we have seen? It means they will have to come to you, Felix. They'll have to increase some rates. And I'm not being a prophet of doom, but wait and see the bills that will be tabled. I know some of them will be what we'd call bad taxes, those that are aimed at increasing the revenue, but at the cost of the Mutua 1C. So all these are questions that we want to see and are delving. Some of the hits, Moses had highlighted quite a number of these things. Some of the hits, what I would call the hits, yes. One of the key selling points that we have as a government, of course, is the parish development model. It's the bullseye. If we get it right, that's like the bullseye that will help turn the situation around that we've discussed about. And in the new, if you look at the budget framework paper, they're proposing to collapse quite a number of wealth funds that have been, and that's something that we welcome, but we have our reservations around it, that I would share. We are seeing, in terms of compliance to the gender and equity, this is an analysis that looks at how the budget has been compliant in terms of gender considerations. How have the youth been considered? How have the people with disabilities been considered? It has scored really well. Quite a number of programs, if you look at the analysis by the Equal Opportunities Commission, they have done really well on that. And that's something we commend. In terms of allocative efficiency simply means how well the allocations have been made to address some of the targets that the NDP would want to see achieved in order to see better outcomes. There's been some sort of shortfall in there, especially to the public sector transformation program, regional development program, where the local governments fall, and the climate and natural resources program. These are areas that we see are still lacking. However, I have to cut some slack to government. The area of storage and agro-processing, as well as value addition, there has been something good compared to what the NDP guided. So this is something they have been keen on to try and make sure at least the agro-industrialization component is at least well catered for in that next budget. So these are some of the good areas that we are seeing. However, local government financing has reduced, if you look at the current budget framework paper, from about 4.5 in the current financial year trillion to about 4.2. And whenever a reduction in local government financing happens, the impact will be felt by us. This is in light with the increase in the administrative units. Remember, 10 cities, about 135 districts, 41 municipalities. There's recruitment of parish chiefs that's happening, yet the allocation to support some of these have remained low. And if you look at the wage and non-wage component, these have remained unchanged, despite the staffing gaps, like I've showed you. Lastly, on local government, 17% of that budget is what is going to development. Felix, me and you know what that means, honestly. That will simply show you that as much as, yes, the figures up there look amazing, the theme looks amazing, when you now trickle it down, some of these areas are concerning. Coming back to the center, if you look at the areas, yes, over the years they have been improving and they have a strategy in place of reducing domestic areas. But Felix, domestic areas are, there are lots of service providers that give government service. And if you look at the repayments, I think in the current budget, the NBFP shows up, I think of about 400 billion that has been allocated just to pay for the areas. Remember, the current area figure, when it was audited, stands at around 1.3 trillion. So of that 1.3 trillion, how many of those people will be empowered to get back on their feet if just 400 billion is being allocated? Yes, we appreciate that at least something has been done, but that's an area of concern. The other issue, we noticed that just a handful of agencies had submitted their strategic plans, you can imagine, for the next year's budget. So we're wondering, what are they budgeting? What's informing their budgeting? A number of them, I can mention some, but I will not mention, some that are quite obvious. And this we raised before Parliament. If you look at the program approach, there's still some, hangover, if I may say, with the sector-wide approach. If you look at the budgets and you scrutinize them in the NBFP, you'll find quite a number of them still speak sector language. This is the third year of the NDP3. We are now in the third year. And financial year 2022-2023 will be the third year of the NDP, So all these are areas that when you look at, yes, the theme is on point. Some of the allocations have been considered. If you dig deeper into some of the things that usually affect the implementation of our budget, a very good budget usually, these are areas that usually concern us. Finally, we have seen a number of non-adherences to the PFMA, despite it being premised overall. If you dig deeper, you'll find a number of weak safeguards on supplementary budgeting, like Moses painted to you. By the end of the financial, you find our budget has shot up, and most of this is consumptive expenditure. So you'll find there are no safeguards. If you look through in terms of the guidelines, there are no particular safeguards around supplementary budgeting. MDAs are still misusing this. They miss out critical things. At the time of supplementary, bring them and cause a stir in Parliament. In terms of adherence to the climate change responsiveness, the PFMA section, the Climate Change Act, section 30B, does provide for the minister to ensure that MDAs have adhered to climate change responses. We've seen this happen, and this has been very critical all across the world. But we don't see that, yet it was passed. Without that, we see The contingencies fund, if you look through, I have checked severally, I've not seen anything being put for the contingencies fund. The contingencies fund is one supposed to help us when we experience unforeseen things like the COVID, for example. This is something we had not foreseen. Had we had a fund in place, this would help us to have a starting point. It would be a cushion for us to start and respond to. Section 26 of the Public Finance Management Act does provide that 0.5% of the previous budget will be provided and set aside for the contingencies fund, and goes ahead in section 4, provide that this will be allocated to disasters, things that may come which we haven't planned for as a country. Felix, you know that that's good planning when you have contingencies in your budget. Even in our wedding budgets, we have contingencies. Why not in the national budget? If you look through critically, I don't know, and I've made some few calls to the Accountant General's office that manage this fund, and I've not seen any allocation to this. So those are some of the other anomalies I have seen regarding this NBFP, but overall, I think it's a beginning point to have a discussion. And all these issues that I'm raising, we have raised before Parliament, and some have been considered in the Budget Committee report, as well as the Minority Report.
All right. We're going to take a break. And then when we come back, we go to the specifics, issues around supplementary financing. There's a big problem there in prioritization. When you have a human capital development allocation of 6.9 trillion, and that's where you have education and health, which I discussed, where are the priorities of government. We talked about issues around prioritizing agriculture, digital transformation. In there, they are trying to increase, address issues of unemployment, but you look at the allocations, the language speaks otherwise. Let's take a break and come back and look at the specifics of this discussion.